Hello, and welcome to this podcast series on food authenticity. My name is Will Suter. In this episode, we will be talking to a group of guests from the Food Authenticity Network, an organisation based in the UK which aims to curate and share best practice information on food authenticity testing and food fraud prevention, helping to raise food standards worldwide. This will be a two-part interview, so make sure to come back for the next episode of the podcast as well to hear the conclusion. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining me. Could we do a round of introductions first, just so we know who everyone is? Selvarani, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Thanks, Will. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for having us today. My name's Selvarani Elahi. I'm the Deputy Government Chemist at LGC, and I'm also the Executive Director at the Food Authenticity Network.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Sterling Crew, and I am the Chair of the Food Authenticity Network. Nice to see you.
Great. And Mark?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Woolfe. I'm the Secretary of the Food Authenticity Network. I am now retired, but I used to work for the Food Standards Agency as the Program Manager for the Food Authenticity Program.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So we're talking about food fraud and food authenticity today. Selvarani, how do you define food fraud in your work, and why do you think it's such an important issue?
It's interesting. Although there's a lot of interest in food fraud, there's still currently no legal definition of food fraud around the world, but it's widely accepted to involve intentional adulteration, mislabeling, or misdescription of food for financial gain. There's also in the UK, we use another definition of something related as food crime. And food crime is a form of food fraud. And the UK National Food Crime Unit has defined it as serious fraud that impacts the safety or authenticity of food, drink, or animal feed. It can seriously harm consumers, food businesses, and the wider industry. And also, after the 2013 horse meat issue, it's focused the highlight around the world. So there's currently a lot of global groups working on definitions for food fraud, because actually it can be a barrier to international trade. So in the UK, we call it something slightly different. In the US, they might call it something slightly different. And again, that all causes issues when people are trying to import and export food. So currently there are two international groups. There's one called CEnvH, which is a European standardization group, and they have a committee on food authenticity, and we've got a working group 1, which is looking to set definitions. And then there's Codex, which is a worldwide organization, governmental organization, and they have an imports and exports committee that have just tabled a work item on food fraud. So that's all really encouraging. So in the next few years, we will have some standardized definitions that we can use all around the world. DEFRA in the UK also commissioned the Food Authenticity Network to look at global definitions, and we've just completed that work, and we've fed it into the European work, and very shortly we'll be feeding that into the global Codex work too.
So in the eyes of consumers, often the food issues around food fraud are often linked to food safety and the actual safety of the food that they're consuming. How do you think those kind of legal definitions differ between food safety and food fraud? And is there a link between the two?
Absolutely, there is. My experience in the food sector as a food regulator, working as a retailer or in manufacturing, my interest has always been in food safety. And that's why I'm looking at food fraud now. There's a definite link between the two. 3 out of the 4 largest global food fraud incidents in the last 15 years have demonstrated that large food safety link. Let's face it, food fraudsters are criminals. They're not food scientists. And what they're doing is trying to make money. So some of the things they do to make money inadvertently create a food safety issue. Perhaps one of the most famous of that is in 2008 with melanin in infant food in the Far East, where people tried to add extra chemicals to it, melanin, to make the milk look more expensive, raise the detection of protein. But as a result, a consequence of that, they hadn't realized the health consequences. And we had, 6 babies died from that. And 300,000 people were made very ill. It affected people's kidneys. So you could see that food safety link. We've seen it in the horse meat scandal that Selvarani's just referred to, because this meat has been, even though it's a different species, it's outside of regulatory control. Where's it coming from? So again, you don't know how safe that meat is. It's not just that it's the wrong species, but it's outside of that kind of insight. that you can get, and transparency that you can get from regulators. And in the UK as well, the biggest food fraud case we had that's impacted on public recalls was Sudan 1. I don't know if you remember that, in 2005, where Sudan 1, it's a chemical dye used industrially, but somebody used it to make chili powder look a lot more attractive. But on the back of that, this Sudan is a carcinogen. And so we had 470 products taken off the shelf because there was this potential food safety issue. And you could argue that the poison's in the dose and that some of it was at a very diluted level, but the very fact that there was a carcinogen in there and it was a legal substance had consequences. And then even at kind of a local level, this doesn't have to be national. We just had a recent case in the UK where somebody died from anaphylaxis. The person was allergic to peanuts. He went into his local restaurant and was saying, "Do you have any peanuts?" And the person said, "No, it's all almonds." So he wasn't allergic to almonds. But in fact, what the owner was doing is substituting expensive almonds with peanuts. And obviously that was just a fraud case to save money, but the consequence is somebody killed. So there is that really strong link, I think, between food safety and food fraud. And that's what generates my interest in the subject. It's not just about criminality, it's about safety.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. So in terms of the Food Authenticity Network that you're all a part of, what are the general aims of that organisation?
Thanks, Will. I'll take that one. So the Food Authenticity Network was actually set up as a direct recommendation of the Elliott Review. So Professor Elliott from the Queen's University of Belfast was commissioned by the UK government in the wake of the horse meat incident, which shook consumers' confidence in the supply of food to the UK. They said, well, if I can't trust what's on my label, what else is wrong with my food? So Professor Elliott and his team conducted a very comprehensive review and came up with a set of recommendations. And one of those was around laboratory testing and resilience in the UK, and said that those working in this space needed access to laboratories that were using fit-for-purpose methods for food authenticity, and that they needed to be coordinated by this network. So the network was set up in July 2015 by DEFRA, and the aim of it is to signpost to all global practice on food fraud mitigation and food authenticity testing, so that actually, methods used in the UK and in other countries we work towards becoming standardized, so that hopefully the results are not too different. As I said, we started in 2015, and now we have over 2,500 members from 81 different countries. And in 2020, over 21,500 unique users accessed information on the website from 133 different countries. So really showing that the network has very good global reach now. I mean, the ultimate aim for us really is to create this global network, so that when it's not a matter of if, I think it's when the next food fraud incidents happens, then we can all respond in an evidence-based, rational manner, rather than have any sort of knee-jerk reactions to things without having the evidence base there. And so ultimately, we can reduce the impact on consumers and legitimate food businesses, so that consumers can have confidence in our global food supply chain.
Excellent. So, Mark, do you want to tell us a bit more about the network and the materials that you have available on the website for people? Okay,
well, I'd like to talk to the slide which shows the main features of the website. In fact, there are nine main features you can see on the slide. I'll outline the most important ones. The most viewed tab, which Selvarani's already mentioned, are the news items, and these include scientific papers on innovative authenticity methods, including review papers. There's also news on fraud incidents around the world, as well as any problems with crops or animals, especially if it might affect the global food supplies. So this is closely followed by the events tab, which gives news of meetings, webinars, conferences, which are relevant to food authenticity and fraud. There's a training tab on the website, which gives a series of videos on different DNA techniques and a workshop seminar on allergens in spices. The website is a good source of methodology for authenticity in the form of research reports and SOPs resulting from the government's food authenticity research program. Connected to this are the centres of expertise. These are laboratories which can undertake food authenticity analyses, but they have to demonstrate they have the relevant expertise and experience to do so for being designated COE. And as Selvarani's pointed out, this was one of the main reasons to set up the website, was to have this resilient network of laboratories that could respond to any future food fraud incidents. There's also the possibility of members of the website to post discussions, for example, if they're doing a survey or require specific authenticity information from other members. There's also a products and services section where members can post a new method or equipment developments, and that is designed to show not just our members but also anyone else looking at the website, so it's free to do so.
The great thing about it, Mark, isn't it, that it helps us look at this global supply chain. It's always interesting when I go in there and look at your newsletters that you get people from all over the world contributing. So you've got that real global horizon scanning.
Yes.
Because fraudsters don't recognize boundaries. And our global network, rather than a chain, is so complicated. It's a fantastic way for people to tell each other what's going on. A really great asset, I think.
Yes. Well, it certainly opened my eyes as well.
Yeah. I think one thing I didn't make clear in my introduction is that the network is completely free for people to join. So it's open access to anyone in the world to access this information. And we made this decision very early on and deliberately because we didn't want information to be behind a paywall so that only some people could access it. I mean, the ultimate aim for the network is really to raise standards in the world and to make information accessible to all countries and all users. And some countries have not been fortunate enough to have sophisticated food authenticity research programs like we have in the UK. Ours is at least 30 years old, and we've been targeting this issue for many, many years. So we have a lot of experience and expertise. So we'd like to share that for the benefit of all users in the world. And we can provide a direct link for joining for those who are not yet members.
I see, Selvarani, as well, that lots of people are integrating into their VASAP programs. It's a key part of horizon scanning. And when you come to BRC accreditations, it's a great way of demonstrating to outside people like customers and auditors that you've actually got a very effective way of monitoring what's going on in the world with food fraud.
Yes, that's something I didn't mention, I think, was the food fraud mitigation section, which gives all the relevant systems that on food fraud mitigation that are available to people, and also the organizations which they can turn to if they want information on mitigation as well. So I think that's a very important part of the website information.
Because, for most food businesses, I think, testing is part of their food fraud prevention strategy, but ultimately everyone wants to prevent the fraud from happening in the first place. So I think that, when we first set up the network, it was mainly focused on testing, but I think within 6 months we realized there was a real need and a gap there, and especially for small businesses, they don't have the tools or the time or the resources to invest a lot of time into this. Yeah, it's very important that they tackle food fraud as well as food safety in their whole sort of food integrity program.
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually, that link between the testing to prevent fraudulent products getting onto the market and actually just deterring people from doing the fraud in the first place. And I think something we've learned from previous episodes of this podcast is those things are definitely linked, because a lot of the way these people sort of doing the fraud operate is they look into how food is tested and they see how they can work around that and they find the loopholes. So the more robust the testing is and the more sort of unified this testing approach is across the global industry, the fewer loopholes they're going to be, and eventually it's going to make it hard enough for them to find a loophole that a lot of them won't bother because it just won't be profitable.
Yeah, there's this sort of link about, should you keep the testing methodology secretive so the fraudsters don't know? But I think there's quite a lot of evidence now to show that actually if you tell people you've got methodologies in place, that you're looking, it actually prevents the fraudsters from sort of entering that territory, because they think actually they'll go to a country or to an area where actually there's not much surveillance and not much knowledge around testing. So I think that's the way that people are erring. Rather than keep things secretive, you let people know that you're looking and that you have a strategy across the country to prevent food fraud. And we've also noticed that these fraudsters are getting a lot more technologically savvy. So previously, some of the crimes would have been quite unsophisticated and crude, whereas now when you look at some of the levels of adulteration, there's a high level of skill involved and technical knowledge. So I don't think you can be complacent. Although we've got a very good system in the UK, I think you have to always be on the front foot, try and keep ahead of the fraudsters if we can.
It is like an arms race, isn't it, Selvarani, between us and the fraudsters, everyone trying to keep one step ahead of the other. And I think we'll never actually get to the position where we stop food fraud just by testing, but certainly the innovation that we've seen, and I think that's what FAN delivers. We're always at the cutting edge of technology rather than behind the fraudsters. I think we're still just trying to keep ahead of them all the time.
Yes, I think that's a very good point, actually. Something I found in my own experience was that the lifetime of a method was limited by the fraudsters who got round it. And there's a very good case I know myself of people injecting chicken breast, for example, first of all with hydrolyzed proteins to bump up the water retaining of the injection. And they changed it. As we developed DNA methods, they changed it so that we couldn't detect the DNA, or they only put chicken DNA in it to obscure it. So there is you're right, there's a fight going on, and it does tend to give methods a limited period in which they're going to work before you have to work on new methods and new techniques to overcome the fraudsters.
And I think that the point that Sterling made about the fact that food fraud is here to stay, I think food fraud started really when, with the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, when there was mass migration of people from countrysides to towns, and it created a need for a centralized food supply. And then these criminals realized actually they could con people by putting lots of different things in to bulk out the food, and that's how it started. So I think as well, as long as there's people on this planet, food fraud is here to stay. And we've had a lot of evidence on the network, actually. If you type in organised crime or mafia and the search button, we've had over 10 articles, and there's a lot of evidence that organised crime, criminal gangs are moving into the food fraud space, because actually we all eat food, whereas narcotics, hopefully, is just a small percentage of the population that takes drugs, whereas we all need food. So I think if you look at it on a volume basis, there's more money to be made in food fraud than there is in narcotics. So we definitely have to try to keep ahead of the criminals, because this fight is here to stay.
It's interesting to see the forensic accountants looking at food fraud, isn't it, from a different perspective. And that's what they're saying. Actually, if you're a criminal, there's less chance of you getting caught if you're in food fraud than if you're operating with drugs. And of course, the consequences if you're caught are far less. I mean, you could have the death penalty in some parts of the world for drugs. You go to jail for a long time, and that's not really associated with a lot of food fraud cases. And as Selvarani said, it is more profitable. You can make more money. And we can see that in South America with avocados, which you think is quite an innocuous, lovely product. But the drug cartels are moving into avocados, blood avocados, they're starting to call them, as a way of kind of using a legitimate network to make illegal money.
We're just going to take a short break now to talk about Food Screener, which is a large part of Bruker's efforts to contribute to the global fight against food fraud. Food Screener is an analysis platform based on NMR spectroscopy, which uses repeatable profiling of food samples along with powerful statistical modelling to determine the origin of many food products. If you want to learn how Food Screener could help you ensure the authenticity of your food products, or if you just want to know more about the technology, then please go to bruker.com/foodscreener and reach out to a Bruker expert. Now, let's return to our conversation with Sterling, Mark and Selvarani. Next, I asked them about the potential impacts of non-targeted spectroscopic food testing tools like the Food Screener.
So something else we've talked about in this series is a kind of move from more traditional sort of old school chemical tests for testing food, where you're looking for specific traces of chemicals or the absence of chemicals that tells you whether something's legitimate or not, to using more sort of advanced techniques that use kind of a non-targeted kind of screening approach. So how do you guys think, just for the more technical listeners that we have, can you talk a little bit, maybe Selvarani, do you want to maybe say a bit, how do you think that will play in? Do you think that will be, as those kinds of techniques become more dominant, is that going to shift the game a bit in terms of how people get around these? Because it's so much harder to evade a non-targeted test than a targeted panel.
Yeah, and we've already seen the move really over the last 5 to 10 years for food authenticity. I mean, and this is really why we've got this network of laboratories on the Food Authenticity Network. There are 15 centres of expertise. And the reason for that is food authenticity is actually quite complex. It covers all of the different food commodities in the world, and it practically covers all of the analytical technologies available to us now. So it's unreasonable to think that one laboratory will have all of the experience in the techniques and all of the experience in the commodities, which is why we have this network. So unlike food safety issues where, for example, mycotoxins, we know that they're carcinogens, they're bad for you. So there are some legislative limits there to say that this is a legal maximum in food. So people can analyze the nuts or whatever coming into the country. You compare it against this legal limit, and if it is above, it fails. If it's below, it passes. We haven't got anything like that in the food authenticity space. What you're trying to do is compare the results of some authentic samples that are true or as close to the true thing as possible with an unknown set of samples. So in doing that, that creates quite a lot of uncertainty. A lot of questions come up on the authenticity of the database, and that's something that we face all the time. How were the samples collated? How were they curated? How do you really know that those samples are representative of what you're trying to measure? And then also as analytical chemists, we've seen a progression where you could actually physically see the result and judge for yourself that something's out of spec. Now we have to use mathematical modeling where you look at data sets and it's become a lot more sophisticated. So it's not something you can just work out yourself. You're reliant on modeling and mathematics and statistics, which actually then increases the level of complexity in analysis. So that's why you can see that when you've got a group that's in spec and a group that's out, and there might be some borderline issues there, and that really is where the sort of fraudsters operate, where there's a borderline or an overlap issue, then you can say, well, you're not quite sure if that's authentic or not, and we see many cases of that. So it is a challenge. It's a challenge for the labs, and it's also a challenge for the accreditation authorities, because when you try and say that a method is fit for purpose, it should cover all steps of the analysis, the data analysis, the interpretation, and the reporting. But at the moment, traditionally, people are trained to look at chemical tests or biological tests, and these sort of span those and introduce other disciplines. So for an auditor to have all of these skills, also that creates a challenge there too. So I think food authenticity testing can be very, very challenging for all of these reasons. And I think having this network and also signposting to good practice and good methods is the key to sort of getting to standardization. There was a very big 12 million euro European funded project called the Food Integrity Project that was run by FRSC, finished about 2 or 3 years ago now. And that project produced some scientific opinions that were very important, I think, for this area, because the group of experts got together and said, well, if you're making a database for food authenticity, what should the key components of that be? And all of those scientific opinions are signposted on the network, and they act as a good basis for us to then look at scientific papers that are published. So Mark always looks at the weekly reports that we get, and it allows us to make a judgment as to whether these databases have been created in the way that we would expect them to be, or whether they are just like 10 samples somebody's wandered down to a supermarket and bought and then decided that they were authentic. Mark, you might want to add something to this.
Well, the main thing I'd like to add is the role of actually the instrument manufacturers. And there's been tremendous progress in the last 10, 15 years in developing equipment in spectroscopy, NMR, mass spec, NIR, all these other spectroscopic methods, in having them developed so that they can do non-targeted analyses and build up these databases and have the chemometric analysis done for it. And I think we have to recognize the role of the instrument manufacturers in this very good progress, actually.
So we're going to leave the conversation there for this episode. Do come back next time to hear the rest of the discussion. We'll be talking about the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on food authenticity concerns and the role of national governments in building an effective strategy against food fraud, amongst other things. I hope you'll join us for that. If you want to learn more about how Bruker's NMR spectroscopy tools can help verify the authenticity of food products, go to bruker.com/foodscreener and reach out to one of their experts. Thanks for listening.